I'm going to introduce the panelists and we'll open the panel discussion. We have a very impressive, talented set of people here with us. Jill Sherman is with Girding Edlin Development. Jill is managing the Lane Community College Downtown Campus project in downtown Eugene. I'm sure a lot of you have seen it. It's a landmark project for education, business, and the community. The innovative design and features of the campus will allow Lane Community College to increase training and services, meet sustainability goals, and contribute to the regional economy. Ms. Sherman is experienced in working with public-private partnerships, nonprofits, and projects financed using complex financing structures such as low-income housing tax credits and new market tax credits. In 2007, she was appointed to the Portland Planning Commission, and she serves on the board of directors for the Oregon Southwest Washington chapter of the Urban Land Institute. Brad Maulson is CEO of Beam Development. Beam Development recently completed the renovation of the historic Center Court building in downtown Eugene in a modern office and retail space. From its website, we read this: Beam Development, located in Portland, Oregon, and working throughout Oregon, is a progressive development and management real estate company committed to sustainable building techniques, historical and adaptive reuse, and a creative, community-driven vision of developing flexible, affordable living and working spaces. I happen to know he was also the developer that neighborhoods chose to rally around a large project in Portland. Josh Scove is principal and co-founder of Good Company. His work focuses on the development of sustainability indicators and assessment tools, in addition to development of climate-changing greenhouse gas inventory methodologies. In addition to his professional focus on sustainability, Josh is also an active community member. He serves on Eugene's Sustainability Commission and recently completed his tenure as its chair. Josh is also a member of Lane Transit District's MX Steering Committee. David Bong is the founder and chairman of the board at Avant Assessment. Located in downtown Eugene, Avant is a technology company focused on development of personalized systems of education that engage and motivate each student, regardless of his or her circumstance, to become a global citizen. David is Avant Assessment's co-founder and chairman of the board. Bong brings nearly 30 years of experience in international business, sales, and marketing and management to his oversight role. Prior to co-founding Avant Assessment, Bong was founder of Step.com Communications, Silicon Valley-based provider of stock market prices and company data on U.S.-listed companies for Japanese security firms and investors. He is here in a somewhat different capacity as a client for development, directly for office space for his firm, and indirectly as employer for people who he wants to attract to work for his firm, and thus has some interest in whether the community has the right kinds of housing, transportation, amenity he needs to attract his workforce. We've asked the panelists to comment on the presentations for 2 minutes each, and then we'll have a set of questions and a bit of dialogue. Who would like to go first? Josh, you're at the far end.
Great. No pressure, though. Okay. Thank you. And I just want to say it's a privilege to be able to speak to a community gathering like this and to have such distinguished visitors to share their insights from far away. It sure sounded like a lot of those were pretty relevant to us here. I'm sure all of us have a lot of observations on different aspects of what we're talking about, because it's not just about real estate development, it's about the character of the community, and it is about, well, as the mayor said, what we want to be and who we are. I feel some responsibility to take on a couple of those things about who we are, and maybe we'll get to some of the other issues in the Q&A. So I'll just have 2 quick comments. One about the character of the community and what I've seen in people who live here and what they're committed to, and then a quick comment on MX. There are lots of things about who we are or why we are, as the mayor said, but I want to represent a particular point of view. I think some of it is about the character here, but it's also about how we project ourselves into the world. In my professional life, I tend to do work far from Eugene, and when I go places and people find out that I'm on the Sustainability Commission, by the way, I'm still chair for another couple of months. It's like my tenure hasn't ended yet, unless I don't know about it.
I was handed a note by some people in the audience.
So there's been a coup. But when I go to other places, I say, yeah, it's cool, isn't it? I'm on the Sustainability Commission. They kind of brush aside me, and they say, wait, your town has a Sustainability Commission? Your town has a commitment to that in some sort of formal way. There's an advisory body to elected officials on such issues. I think that is part of it. And what I've noticed being on the commission and hearing public input over and over the last 5 years is that there's a real commitment to these issues. And I appreciated Chris's connection to the connections he drew between these issues of local development and the character of our city, of our metropolitan area, and climate change and taking action. I think if there is one thing about who we are that I feel pretty confident saying, it's that there's a tremendous number of people here who are committed to taking action on climate. I don't think that is an environmental issue. The quick caveat I'd add is that this is very much an issue of social justice. This is very much an issue of economic development. And when you hear people talk about climate action, you should be hearing those things. And when you hear it categorized and sort of dumped in the environmental bucket, say, no, this is a broader thing. And so when you think about climate action and we think about urbanism and what we can do with our city, please think about it in that light. The very particular comment I would make on that is to reinforce the comments that have been made on public health. I think we too often have global warming and urbanism, or the way we build our towns, and how healthy we are as people in very separate places in our minds. And those things are inherently connected. And I think what you heard today really reinforced those things. Putting on my other hat as a member of the MX Steering Committee, I just want to make one quick comment. I think Chris was right to point out that the jury is still out in a formal analytical sense on bus rapid transit. It hasn't been done to the extent light rail has. We don't have the we don't have the longitudinal studies with large N that we would like to do the kind of analysis that Brookings does on these issues. But I will say one thing that MX offers that it has 100% in common with light rail, and that is that it offers permanence. It offers an investment in physical infrastructure that developers can look at and that people in the real estate world can say, that's going to be there. That's not a bus route where the sign can be picked up and moved. That is a change in the built environment. And in that sense, it's very much like light rail, and it should have many of those benefits. So that's something that we've been arguing about a lot here in Eugene. I think it is worth thinking hard about, but it's also part of the attraction of that particular policy.
Thank you, Josh, and sorry the demotion was unintentional. David.
Well, good morning, and thank you very much for the chance to be here today. And thank you for the presentations. I was inspired and enlightened. It was a tremendous morning of learning. As Robert said, I am the chairman of Avant Assessment. I've also started another company called NUSI. And so we are consumers of human capital. We are members of the knowledge economy, very active members of the knowledge economy. We need good workers who can help us develop the tools and products that we're building. Shelley Berman, the superintendent of 4J schools, spoke a couple of days ago about the things that he learned in a study in Louisville, Kentucky, where he was before he moved here. The things that draw people to a community and keep them there. Their education for their children, and of course we know the challenges that we have in Springfield and Eugene around public education, but we have leadership that's addressing those issues, and I'm excited about the future. They need jobs for their kids. Well, I see an awful lot of excitement and energy and actual movement in downtown Eugene and around the city, bringing jobs to the city. And the third thing is cultural infrastructure, and that's broadly stated to include things like transportation and also entertainment. We're blessed to have wonderful cultural resources here, the Shedd Institute, the opera, the symphony, and if I could put a pitch in for an organization that I'm on the board of, the Lord Liebrecht Theater, which is moving back to Broadway and doing its bit to invigorate downtown. We also have a healthy sports culture here. You might have a little more trouble finding people to lose 10,000 pounds here than in Mississippi. It's a running culture. It's exciting. I never ran before I came here, but you get swept up into the excitement of the community. And I would add one thing to that list, which is leadership. And that's something that I've seen emerge in Eugene and in Springfield in the time that we've been here since 1999. We have tremendous leadership at all levels of our community. The mayors of our towns, the city managers, the heads of the chambers of commerce all work together in a supportive way to move us forward. We have a long slog, but we're on our way. And I think the information that Chris was able to provide on the trends, the changes, how urban cultures are taking hold, how walkable urban environments are the way of the future is exciting to know. You couple that knowledge with the vision that Mayor Smith provided, and I think you have a clear map on how to get to a very bright future. And I think Eugene and Springfield have laid down the basis for that emergence, but we've got a long way to go, and I'm thrilled to see everybody here participating.
Thank you very much. Jill?
So I just wanted to speak for a minute to, the idea that what we talked about kind of, and what Chris talked about in particular, and what the research shows in terms of demand in millennials, that actually is what we are experiencing as a real estate developer. So in other words, there is demand out there for mixed use, walkable places that have interesting, other things that people can experience in the community. And we, in fact, raised an equity fund over the last couple of years, which, as you can imagine, has not been the best time to be out raising an equity fund. And our strategy was really to focus on walkable communities, transit-oriented locations, and mixed-use sustainable buildings. And we believe that the reason we were successful in the current economy to raise $180 million is because that strategy is starting to resonate even with, traditional and institutional investors. And we are seeing those kinds of changes in the industry. So whereas we may have spent a lot of time trying to convince our lenders 5 years ago to let us build less parking, 0.6 per unit for an apartment or condominium project rather than 1.5 or 2 per unit, and they didn't believe, you won't rent them, you won't sell them. Now there's starting to be a little bit of a track record and understanding, so we don't have to fight quite as hard to do some of those things. And both appraisers and lenders are starting to understand the value of green building and sustainability and LEED certification, both from an expense perspective, so lower operating expenses, as well as sort of a quality of life, indoor air quality and connection to outdoors, and the ability to attract employees who want to actually be in those kind of places. So I think that it's really true, the numbers and the demographics and the graphs bear it out, but actually what we're seeing and experiencing on the ground also bears it out. And then the last thing I would say is just the importance of public-private partnerships. A lot's happening in downtown Eugene today. I mean, it's very impressive when you look at other cities, and right now there's not a lot of development happening. And the support and leadership of your city, at a staff level and also at a leadership level, is really critical to that. And there's financial support that's been brought to bear that has been really critical to making those projects feasible. And I think it will transform your downtown, and you will actually see that return on investment with other additional private dollars that will be catalyzed by the investment that's been made and the vision that's been brought to bear. It is challenging to build these kinds of more dense projects. You're looking at structuring parking or putting parking underground. It's a more expensive construction type. And in some markets, you may not have the rents there. You're starting to see rents be a premium in those places, but you still, depending on your market, may not quite be there. And then the idea of having creatively using other sources, which do typically include tax credits or public sources, can be really key to actually getting something off the ground.
Thank you, Jill. Brad?
Well, first of all, I'd like to thank all of you for coming. I think the speakers did an excellent job in outlining what the opportunities and challenges that exist. And for me, I see an incredible opportunity. I see a time that we need to respond to the changes in our economic environment, in the real estate development community. There are clear signals out there that things have to change. I mean, I think what you hear from these people who are able to study the nation as a whole and look at cities is that there are patterns, there are trends, there are opportunities. And as a community, with the leadership that you have, this is a moment in time that you need to invest in your community and to encourage investment in your community. There's been years that have gone by that everybody runs, for cover under the economic crisis that we face, and I feel like we're starting to come out of that. And the way that we will come out of that is by believing in the long-term investment, midterm, long-term investment in our communities. I want to touch on a couple of important points. I think that let's just talk about sustainability for a moment. Sustainability covers a lot of things, and green buildings are important, and LEED certification is important, but sustainability also needs to address the social aspect and make sure that we give businesses and people opportunities to live and work in our downtowns. I think that is probably the most important element to what you've heard today, that people don't want to commute as long, people want to be able to walk and recreate in their downtowns, and we need to give them that. I think people will respond to working and living in the urban cores of our cities. I've had the good fortune of, as many of you might know, I'm from New York. I live in Portland. We work in Eugene. We've made investments in those cities, and I think there is just this horizon of energy and passion that, let's just talk about Eugene for the moment, that's there that we can capture and we can take advantage of. There's been a lot of pent-up demand, I think, for people to see things happening. I think the tide has changed, and I think if we push forward on encouraging and supporting the development that is already in existence, as well as future, we'll all reap the rewards from that. I also want to touch on, I think this was covered by our keynote speakers, that historic preservation is a very important component to downtown urban core preservation. What delineates downtowns is this history that we've had, and preserving those buildings, in addition to adding new development, new construction, but the historic inventory of buildings is incredibly important to telling the story of where the city has been and where the city needs to go and what it wants to accomplish. I think that I look forward to working with Eugene and the city of Eugene and doing more development and preserving more buildings and adding new inventory to the market. So thank you.
Thank you. How about an intermediate round of applause for our panelists? Received a number of questions, and there are a few themes. So I'm going to pick one that's come up on 3 cards, which is, how do we supply affordable housing in downtowns in a place where there is a market premium? And I know that I think both Chris and John talked about that a little bit, but if you give details and other panelists can chime in, and I'll kind of keep things flowing. Who would like to start? It's fine.
Well, I'll tell you the tools we used. You have new market tax credits, and most historic downtowns qualify for new market tax credits. Historic tax credits, if it's a historic structure, low to moderate income housing tax credits. We also created a TIF district, tax increment financing district, that has been very beneficial to not only commercial enterprises, but those residential enterprises that are rental income properties. When we created it for the entire city because you have to go back to the public to add to the district. So just do the whole city and then you fight that fight once. But all of those components help the private sector do what you want them to do. And then we would do things like seek from the state secretary abandoned property or property where the taxes hadn't been paid. We would take ownership from the state, and then we would offer that property to developers. Some was vacant, some was buildings that could be rehabbed, and we would offer it for just the cost of the legal fee to transfer title if you would build affordable housing on that site. Whether it was coming back with apartments within a building or a standalone home in the historic downtown, larger historic downtown area. And that had stimulated some real activity until the downturn. And of course, all housing pretty well came to a stop then. But we're seeing it pick back up again now as things improve.
There's short-term things and long-term things. And Mayor Smith just went over a lot of what was on my list of 14 things that could be done. One is, though, do you allow granny flats in Eugene and Springfield? Is it legal? Because if it's not legal, that's a very simple way to both provide affordable housing and allow for young homeowners to get into a ownership situation. But in most
Chris?
towns, it's not legal.
Chris, and a granny flat is?
Pardon me? A granny flat is but here's another fact that I made up because nobody can challenge it. I'm guessing there's 150 million surplus bedrooms in this country, and it's a matter of renting them out, not like a rooming house, but it would be a separate part of your house. It might be your basement. And on HGTV, they have a great show called Income Property, where these guys come in generally to Canadian places, because Canada tends to do this a lot smarter than we do, and turn basements into rental apartments. Generally they're called granny flats, but it's converting these spare bedrooms into separate units that can then be rented. I first saw this, I first learned this in second grade, that my second grade teacher, Miss Demand, who I loved, I found as I was walking to school, and you may remember that we used to walk to school, she was coming out of a granny flat of a townhouse down the street, and we walked to school together, and I finally, in later life, realized that she was renting the granny flat from the homeowner, and it was providing affordable housing for my beloved school teacher. So that's one. Second is inclusionary zoning, and that's to 10, 15, 20% of all new housing must be affordable by some standard, but it's critical that you have that on as broad a basis as possible. If you just do it for, say, downtown Springfield, you're basically saying we're going to handicap and force you to subsidize just in downtown Springfield and not anyplace else. But it is the cheapest way to do this because it really just reduces land value throughout the region, and it'll be painless. People just won't notice it. Montgomery County, Maryland is the best model in the country. They've produced about 25,000 permanently affordable housing units in a very, very wealthy county by putting a 20% inclusionary zoning throughout the entire county. And it just changes the playing field evenly. And yes, in the early years, yes, land might have been worth a little bit less, but nobody really felt it. And they produced a lot of great affordable housing. But ultimately, what needs to be done is build more walkable urban places. The reason for the price premium is the imbalance between supply and demand. That's why you have gentrification. So, and so the final thing that I did in downtown Albuquerque is I set up the Albuquerque Civic Trust, and I seeded it by giving this nonprofit that was building affordable housing, that was its mission, I gave it 10% of my company's ownership, and then I urged other private property owners to do the same thing, so that as we did better, there was a recycling mechanism whereby gentrification paid for affordable housing.
Two comments on the subject, by the way, and Chris, no one would blame you for not knowing that in 1995 inclusionary zoning was outlawed by the Oregon legislature as soon as it became a topic of conversation.
Very enlightened.
There is voluntary inclusionary zoning, and actually I think there are opportunities to do that. It's basically a bonus system, has not been much explored. So we are handicapped a little bit. The other comment is in downtown Springfield, which hasn't received as much comment this morning. It's interesting that one of the signature projects, I think was done by St. Vincent de Paul, is the Royal Building. And I don't think it often occurs to people that affordable housing can be a placemaking kind of investment, and that's certainly something that stands out when you see kind of revival of development in Springfield.
And by the way, it's not just affordable housing, it's workforce housing as well, which from a technical point of view is roughly 80 to 120% of the average median income. This is for our school teachers, this is for our firemen, and we need to integrate that housing into our mainstream.
Another set of questions concerns money, which is there's less of it at local, state, and federal level for infrastructure, and sometimes the infrastructure is the necessary key for investment to build more walkable, livable, vibrant downtowns. Have any of you explored alternate financing mechanisms that don't require as much public subsidy or public investment in infrastructure? I'll look to our developers here.
Well, we talked about was mentioned that the historic and new market tax credits. New markets typically cannot be used for housing, but historic tax credits can. But referring to the affordability factor with non-subsidized is the fact that smaller, very efficient spaces are really make them a lot more affordable. We did a project in Portland called Milepost 5. It's a kind of a creative community for artists and other creatives. And the units start at about 200 square feet. They go for less than $250 a month, including all the utilities. You'd be surprised, 200 square feet sounds like a small space, and it is. But you cannot believe how people are able to use square footage. Again, you know, I'm from New York. My first apartment in Manhattan was about 300 square feet. And, you know, it was before a wife and 2 dogs and 3 kids. But by myself and with an occasional girlfriend, it was very comfortable. And I did not lack for efficient space. So I think we need to also think about the affordability factor of, on a per square foot basis, what kind of affordability factor can we engage into a development based upon the fact that if we're talking about affordable housing or workforce housing, that people can operate in a much smaller space than we typically think of and be relatively happy.
So one thing that comes to mind, and I think this is illegal too, in Oregon right now, is you know, how we charge our systems development charges. So right now, you essentially get charged based on, you know, the square footage or the plumbing units you add, et cetera, and it really doesn't matter where you're building. So even though clearly you would assume that you're going to have a lower impact on both the transportation infrastructure and probably sewer and water, because there's already sewer and water if you're in an urban walkable neighborhood, as opposed to building out in the suburbs, it doesn't take this into account. And that would be a way that you could use those fees by charging more, you know, really trying to get people or developers to pay really for the impact they're having on infrastructure as opposed to not taking that into account at all. So that would, might help, incentivize certain types of development rather than having to build additional infrastructure.